Welcome, 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 everybody, to our ongoing, continuing discussion with liberals and conservatives and alt-right and alt-left. Anybody from America, anybody who has thoughtful, informed opinions. We're trying to make sure that you, the public, are informed and bringing those opinions directly to you. With us today is our special guest, Patrick Mazza. Patrick is I'm sorry?
I'm looking at what you're pulling up. Yeah. Why move to direct action? Yeah.
So what we did was he took a collection of different activist things you had done and sort of made a collage. You've been very active as a social activist,
Yes,
and journalist since 1981. We wanted to capture that. If I'm mistaken, but you seem to be very left, very liberal, very willing to stand in the line, very willing to get arrested, very willing to stand up for what you believe in, direct action, activism on the ground, at least for about 4 decades. And it seems like you were involved in a variety of progressive causes that were the cause célèbre over the last couple of generations here in America.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I would describe myself as progressive left. I do distinguish myself from a lot of what is called the left, which is more oriented toward being Democrat Party insiders. I think I'm, and I've had a strong green and environmental bent to it, kind of an ecological bent as it reflects the larger social and natural ecology. So yeah, I've over the years, I actually was involved in one of the actual largest anti-Vietnam demonstrations when I was going to school in D.C. in 1971, May Day, where over 12,000 people were arrested. Later, I engaged in the Northwest, or as we call it, Cascadia forest struggles in the 80s and 90s, and was kind of there when a lot of it broke out. Was editing a radical newspaper in Portland called the Portland Alliance. It was also the local Earth First crash pad. So I've been on the edge. I've been very focused since the late 90s on the climate challenge. I do believe it is a great challenge that we are not really dealing with. So those two incidents. One is the one where I've got my hand up is where I was preparing to sit in front of a BNSF oil train at the BNSF Everett Delta Yard. We managed to for our trial, we managed to obtain the first climate civil disobedience necessity defense in U.S. history, where the argument is that, yeah, we broke the law, but we were trying to avert a greater harm. Unfortunately, we weren't able to persuade the judge to let our evidence be admitted to the jury, or they would have let us off, they told us. The other one there is where I'm going out with handcuffed is a protest at the Chase Bank in one of the Chase banks in Seattle against their investment in fossil fuels. So I do believe in direct action. I've got political diversity in my friends and family. So I do understand and talk to people from the other side. My basic kind of the substrate on which everything else is built is journalism. I started as a straight reporter back in the late 70s and concluded that wasn't my cup of tea. I would have to take a stand. So, but that taught me to take in, at least understand what the other side is saying, at least understand their viewpoint. So if possible, to have a rational discussion with them. When I was first a reporter, I was reporting in some very conservative areas in Eastern Washington. So, I understand, and through my climate activism, I actually work with farmers on their possibilities in clean energy. So I work with farmers who don't believe in that climate change is real, but they were doing
perfect.
They were doing the right thing. They were doing the right thing. So
You sound perfect.
I really don't care what you think if you're locking up carbon in your soil and, and doing that. So I try to understand both sides of the issue and take a stand for what I believe in.
So you are a leftist who actually talks to conservatives.
Well,
basically,
when I can,
yeah. And I apologize for the terminology. We use that just so the public can understand. A lot of times I have conservatives on, they go, well, I'm not a conservative or a Republican or an alt-right. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. And I'm like, but people don't know what that means. Like, people understand left, right, kind of moderate, simple. And so when you get into these myriad of family terminology, I'm like, I hear you. I just got to make it simple for people to follow along.
Yeah.
Like, this is roughly where he fits. Okay.
I tend to call myself a progressive,
Okay.
For a lot of people, that's the same difference.
So let me, did you ever read Ecotopia by Ernest Kallenbach?
Oh, I read Ecotopia very early, soon after I moved to the Northwest in 1977, and even hung out with Ernest Kallenbach.
Really?
And yeah, in the early 80s, I was contributing editor to a journal called Rain Magazine, and Ernest, it was kind of an early ecological appropriate technology, and Ernest came up to then I was in Portland, and we had events with him and visited with him down in Berkeley. So yeah, I knew Ernest, who has unfortunately passed away a few years ago. But yeah that was an early inspiration to me. It
inspired me.
Yeah.
You were also covered on 350 Seattle, if I'm not mistaken. That's Bill McKibben, the famous climate activist.
Yeah.
Has a article up on Patrick, which just lets you know a little bit about how in depth Patrick is recognized.
Let me correct you a little bit there. Bill McKibben is one of the founders of 350.org. And the interesting thing about 350.org is it's a decentralized organization. So 350 Seattle is actually an affiliate that's an independent organization, but affiliated with the 350.org network. So yeah, I'm not as active with 350 Seattle nowadays, but I have done work there on community solutions. I was president of the board up until I think 2019. So I've done, that's, how I've done a lot of my recent climate activism.
Do you know Bill McKibben?
I know Bill. Yeah, I know Bill.
You met him?
Yeah, I met him, and he recommends my Substack on his Substack. So yeah, I know Bill.
Okay. So just so that everybody at home, I hope you're picking up on this. Patrick has met Ernest Kallenbach and Bill McKibben. I think that says everything. If you know who those people are, what sort of realm he's in, the level of connections and respect that he has. Here's a little bit on that action you did. Right. This is it, right?
That's it. Yeah. So what happened? We are very concerned about oil trains, not just for the climate impacts, but also for the safety impacts. I mean, you've seen in recent years a number of oil trains go off the track and they turn into little Hiroshimas. You can see the mushroom clouds rising from them. And so we were able to get a necessity defense on the grounds that oil trains threaten the climate and threaten the communities they roll through. We were able to present evidence from climate scientists, from rail safety experts, but in the end, the judge said we hadn't proved that we had no reasonable legal alternatives, which is always the case. Though I testified that I'd been working on climate for years, all kinds of reasonable legal alternatives, including working on legislation in the Washington state legislature, working on multiple stakeholder efforts to kind of draw together consensus on major issues. But that didn't work. We met some of the jurors out in the hall afterwards, and they said, if we had been allowed to consider the evidence, we would have let you off. but that was the first necessity defense, and the second in the world. The first was in the UK. Some Greenpeace climbers who climbed up a coal plant smokestack, and they did get off. And more have been done since then, but we were first in the U.S.
You're a pioneer.
I tried to be.
Journalist, researcher, activist, focused on the climate, clean energy, and global sustainability, and co-authored the new book, Solutionary Rail. I want to point out that Patrick Mazza has been able to write at The Atlantic. That means he's recognized by international policy experts.
I'm not sure where that comes from because I haven't. I'm not sure. Because I don't think I've ever had anything picked up in The Atlantic.
You may not, but they know who you are.
They know who I am, and the Solutionary Rail book is actually a book I did with Bill Moyer while I was, sitting on railroads. I was also working on a practical proposal for railroads, which is to electrify railroads with renewable energy and restore railroads for freight and passenger service.
Bill Moyer? You know Bill Moyer.
This is different Bill Moyer. Different Bill Moyer.
Okay. I was like, come on, that's three in a row.
There's a lot of Bill Moyers.
That's three in a row, man. Come on.
Bill Moyer Backbone Campaign.
Okay. I was like, all right, who do you know? Obama next? Okay.
No.
Do you know Obama?
No, I don't know Obama.
Okay. Right. Well, now I don't know.
I frankly have some words for him.
Well, okay, hold on. We're not doing that today. I hear you.
We'll have you back on. No, I don't know Obama.
Okay. Counterpunch. He also writes for Counterpunch, which is a very progressive, lefty, whatever you want to call it, magazine. I've read them for years. And there's the article, National Divorce Separating the Red and the Blue, March 2nd, 2023. He also writes for Resilience. Journalist since 1981, lived in Seattle, 1998, Pacific Northwest, Cascadia since 1977. 1977, by the way, was the year that I was born. 5 Civil War scenarios. This was something that you had written about that really grabbed me and was part of the reason why I really wanted to talk to you. Polling tested various Civil War scenarios and measured the differences between Democrats and Republicans, which are significant. There will be a civil war between people who are Republican and Democrats. Overall, 40% said it is likely, while the percentage answering was very likely was 14%. The not likely results are almost a mirror image between the parties. 45% of Republicans consider civil war likely compared to 35% of Democrats. People who believe democracy will survive in the U.S. only marginally exceed those who expect it to end. 39 versus 38%. The end of U.S. democracy is considered very likely by 13%, but the number who think that very unlikely are not much greater at 18%. Still, it feels tragic that at a time when people in the U.S. need to come together more than at any other time in our history to address the country's mounting challenges, we seem more divided than perhaps at any other time before the original Civil War. Chalk it up to national political and economic leaders who, on the whole, seem more interested in lining their own pockets and ruling by divide and conquer techniques, a mass media similarly spurring divisions to increase ratings, and people sedated by sports and entertainment taught to be consumers rather than citizens. Before we go on, thoughts, feelings, because those are some very sobering and eye-catching statistics. That was part of the reason I reached out to you. This is one of the questions I ask everybody. I might not ask you, but I read about 30 articles about national divorce after Marjorie Taylor Greene made her statement. None of them brought up statistics like you did. All of them said, she's crazy. We don't have a problem. Basically, everybody gets together and agrees. What is this crazy woman talking about? And when Marjorie goes, everyone I talk to talks about this. Of course they do, you silly lady. No one speaks about this. And then a month later, there was a second round of articles where they brought up the statistics that outright back up Marjorie. How come you were able to find statistics that 30 other publications, including all mainstream media, were not?
I guess they weren't paying attention. They were right there. I mean,
really?
I get my original source, but I'm a relentless information junkie. So I'm out there all the time looking for stuff, especially in certain areas like this national division area. And that was, I forget where I saw it, but it was right there to be had. There's other polling that I featured in my blog, which shows high percentages of people favoring splitting the country apart into regional commonwealths or regional states. And you had at the time of the polling, a majority of Republicans in the South and a really high level of Democrats on the West Coast. Those are the two most centrifugal areas of the country. So you really do find a lot of people who either favor it or think it's going to happen. And the national media, how do you kind of climb up into the national media is by playing the game and playing into the conventional narrative.
You said it. I didn't. He said it. I didn't say it. We're just,
like I said, I started as a mainstream reporter way back in my mid-20s, and I pretty well saw after about 3 years of that even in the smallest, you get your brain kind of lined up in a frame, and it's really hard to break out of that. So you can see giving Marjorie Taylor Greene credibility is, you can see why national media people would have an instant prejudice against that.
Sure.
She does a lot of outrageous stuff.
Sure. But two backup questions, if I may. I constantly hear the news saying, don't listen to citizen journalists because they don't have the training to do fact checking and back up the facts. And we are dedicated to the facts and providing information to you. If that's true, they should have no bias. And they should have immediately said, I don't like Marjorie, but she's right. Here are the facts because we're a fact-checking organization. Yet all of them said that and none of them did that. How did that happen?
I'm not sure. Again, I think they just get into a pattern and get locked in, and there's great peer pressure not to go off.
That's what I was looking for right there.
Yeah. Peer pressure.
That's what I was looking for. Almost like we don't live in a free country, that there's the unseen hand saying what you can report and what you can't report. How totally different from Russia and China, right?
Right. Yes.
Right.
But, there's
because we're free and no one tells the media what to do. They just report the truth.
No, I frankly regard the big East Coast media as worthy of paying attention to find out what they want you to think, rather than necessarily what's the truth.
I'm not going to drill down on this question. I'm just going to ask it one more time, and we're going to move on. I'm not trying to drill down, but I saw Breaking Points News. I saw the Young Turks. I saw Stephen Colbert, and they were all, this is silly. We get along. But the interesting thing that got me was those same organizations had reported on political division 6 months before, 12 months before, 18 months before. So how did multiple news organizations completely forget about reporting they had done themselves?
Well, it seems like a common phenomena. It's again, George Orwell gave the term memory hole, and how much rolls down the memory hole? I mean, a whole lot rolls down the memory hole. And they can't say that about me because I got a degree in journalism from Cal State Long Beach.
Hey, it's California school.
Go 49ers. And I practiced journalism, and I also practiced journalism with I really, I'm frank about where I'm coming from. I don't hide it. And that's the thing about so-called mainstream or objective journalism is the biases are hidden. The biases are there. They're in between the lines, but they cover their asses pretty well.
Can we say that? Because what I'm seeing is I'll see polls going, well, Americans don't really take national divorce that seriously. We found another poll saying they're not really that interested in it. And I keep thinking, Well, you ask these polls after you have 30 different newspapers from around America say there is no division and we all get along. After 30 of you forgot your previous reporting where you said there was political division. So
Yeah.
who are we supposed to believe? The you that said that there was political reporting 5 times over the last 2 years, or the you that says there's no issue in the last 1 month? And why are they so schizophrenic? And if they're that schizophrenic, how can the American public believe anything they have to say on this topic?
Well, that's a good question. People should diversify their news sources. People really should diversify. I tend to look at a lot of news sources nowadays that aren't from the U.S. Especially on world affairs, geopolitics. I think I don't think that the mass press has ever been more propagandistic. And I'm serious about that. And I'm an old man. I'm 70 years old, and I've seen a lot. And
That's why I wanted to interview
you. I've seen a lot, and I don't think it's been ever. And it has a lot to do with media concentration. One thing you have to ask about those 30 outlets is who owns them. Most of the press is owned by, most of the media in the country is owned by 5 or 6 corporations.
Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, that conditions everything. And also, another thing you got to look at the press is its business model has changed. They used to, the newspaper press used to make a lot of money off of lawn ads, advertising. Now that's faded out. The internet has taken over. So, they cater to, the New York Times, for example, caters a lot to its online base, and its online base is heavily liberal. And so they're going to cater to those prejudices. That's just how, 450 independent media companies to 5, Ben Bagdikian wrote a book in the early 1980s called The Media Monopoly, when, 50 corporations owned most of the media, and that has gone down to 5. And,
Yeah.
what do? Diversify your sources, be skeptical, and recognize that our democracy, what we have of it, is in deep trouble. And one of the deepest of the troubles is the lack of truly independent journalism. So, the internet, people like you, people like me, we're trying to fill in those gaps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, that's it. I've been telling everybody during the interview series, I should not be doing this. There should be somebody else. There should be some university system. There should be some scholarly group going, hey, we got these professors together. I've been looking around. The closest thing I found was NPR interviewed 3 professors. I'm up to 20. I should not be doing this, but nobody's doing this. And what that does is tells me everything. There does not appear to be anybody on the left or the right who wants to have in-depth conversations with people on the other side and just give them a platform to hear whatever they have to say. It's about, I have to make you look stupid if you're against my agenda, or I won't talk to you at all. And that exists on both sides of the spectrum. The fact that this is happening and I'm doing it tells me everything about how horrible the state of media and discussion in America is, where outright amateurs have to step in and play Walter Cronkite. Well,
you mentioned the media not catching these statistics, and you've got to look, in 1855, people really didn't seriously believe the United States was going to break up, and even as the states were seceding, they did not, there wasn't a belief that this would turn into a bloody civil war. So history and nature work by, as they say, stepwise, rapid changes. Much that happens in history is not anticipated. And it happens. The collapse of the Soviet Union was not anticipated. By most people. Only a few observers saw that coming, and then it happened.
Right.
And there's the warning signs for a collapse of the American political system.
Yeah.
I'd say they're flashing red.
Let me ask you about that. So this is something you'd written, but that might only increase the centrifugal tendencies in the U.S., which The Raven has covered here and here. The Raven is the Substack location for Patrick Mazza's reading. I've read many of his essays. I suggest you also check out The Raven. It can be argued that the relative ungovernability of the U.S., denying undisputed victory to one side or another, has averted a national breakdown. But if one side gains sufficient power to run the board and enact its full agenda, the results might be so unacceptable to the other side, it would cause a de facto split. Let me be clear, I do not expect a new 1860s with the armies marching against each other, but there is a serious danger of an old idea will return to the fore, the power of states to nullify federal legislation.
Yep.
All of this speaks to a deeply divided nation with almost irreconcilable differences. We must take seriously the prospect of a breakdown in governance systems in the United States over coming years and begin to do some scenario planning for what this will mean. At a minimum, it is difficult to retain any optimism for further progressive gains at the federal level. Over the remainder of this decade, any gains progressives do make are likely at the state and local levels. This makes participation in power building at these levels centrally important, whatever scenario holds. How bad is the situation right now in comparison to previous periods in American history? Is this 1960s bad? Is this 1860s bad? Does it get bad? How bad is it to you, being an American who's lived as a professional journalist, trained eye for the last 4 decades? We've been here before, these things happen, or, oh my God, I've never seen anything like this before?
Well, certainly the 60s were a turbulent period. I remember them well. It appeared at times we would have a kind of national breakdown, but there wasn't the sense of the potential for a national split.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it had been thought we settled that issue in the Civil War. But if you look, I mean, I think you could verify this with the search, but if you look at the increased discussion of secession, national breakup over recent years, it's definitely greater than it was, and people are bringing it to the fore. I mean, we all know there's Cal exit movement, there's a Texit movement, there's a New England secession movement, and these are all kind of marginal. But again, you have these polls, and you also have what I wrote about in my post today, kind of information cascades where things can rapidly diverge and go to extremes. With group clustering, that's the one. Groups can cluster and opinions can harden. So it can happen quite quickly. So I think it's a serious situation that we need to take into account. I don't favor it. I'm not a secessionist. Some of my friends up here in Cascadia, the Great Northwest, are secessionists. I'm not. I would like to see a kind of a different constitutional order where we really have some decentralization of the power to develop ourselves. And at the same time, on another topic, in kind of another area, not spending effectively really close to $1.5 trillion a year on military, and actually putting some money back into this country, and having places be able to do stuff like build fast trains and build affordable housing.
Clean
My
water.
God, I live two miles north of the Amazon campus, and I can't go out in my neighborhood without seeing people living in tents and RVs. This is close.
Yeah.
This is a city with 3 of the top 10 richest people in the world in Seattle. So, I'm kind of wondering here, but we need a different system, because this system we have is, largely gridlocked. There were some kind of, I would say, fairly modest legislative improvements in the first couple of years of the Biden administration, better tax credits for heat pumps, renewable energy, EVs. But really, in terms of really digging deep into the problems we have, we're gridlocked. And my approach, as I said there, it always has been pretty strong, is bottom up. is really innovation starts at the margins. The political innovation starts at the margin. It doesn't start in the national capital. It starts out in places like California, like the Northwest, where you have a political unit at a scale that's reasonable enough for people to have an impact. Cities especially are hotbeds of laboratories of policy innovation, and that's been my approach through my life. It's kind of the ecotopian approach, I'd say. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you, so the article in the Raven, The Drive for Domination, puts the U.S. unity at risk. I think you were talking about how we have a system that seems to reward a winner take all. In other countries, they call it the American style winner take all election. So
Yes.
I won 51% of the vote. 49% of you can go screw yourselves. I'm in charge. Tough, deal with it. Most of the world, and when I've talked to experts on this interview series, I point out most of the world democracies do not use the American style at all.
Right.
And when America went around instituting democracies in the Middle East, neither Iraq or Afghanistan bothered to take the American model. They used the European model, which kind of says a lot. Are we doomed to division because of the system of elections that we have now?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, there is the kind of systems you're referring to are proportional representation, not first out of the post, but ranked choice voting, where you can, and that's I think Alaska has got that now in its congressional election, where you can, where you have potential for a diversity of choices. I will confess that in my past, one of my political involvements has also been the Green Party. And so I've been up against the reality that this system is rigged for two parties.
Right.
And it's getting worse because, the politicians that we have are, kind of rigged the system for themselves. I mean, the other big rigging is gerrymandering, which really is anti-democratic, where you can use computer programs to create electoral districts, congressional districts, legislative districts, where you're almost guaranteed to get one party in office or the other.
True.
And that's increasing. And so we have many obstacles in our democracy. But these two political parties we have are not really representing us. They represent different aspects of big money. And the Democrats, in the Clinton era, ditched a lot of their labor base, ditched a lot of their left base, and went heavily for support by tech, finance, the managerial professional class. And so what happened is a lot of the working class went over to the Republicans, and
Yeah.
We've got a real mess. But places are working on. I believe San Francisco has gone to a more proportional representation.
Sure.
If I'm not mistaken. So
Sure.
that again is an example of just what I said, that we can at the state and local level institute different political systems, different electoral systems that provide models that begin to create democracy from the ground up.
Sure. But I'd like to counter what you said with
Sure.
something else you said. So Patrick Mazza versus Patrick Mazza. In this essay,
That happens.
Drive for Domination puts U.S. unity at risk. You talk about the author David French. David French
Yep.
is a former veteran and a lawyer, and he wrote a book on breaking up the United States by having more federalism so we could stay together in some sort of loose union. And in that you said, well, secession might be caused by a Supreme Court decision that says, oh, this is going to be the law across the land. So I'm hearing you say, hey, I know there's division, folks, but work at the state and local levels. Won't that be completely worthless if, as you say, the Supreme Court issues a ruling that everybody has to use? It doesn't matter what you voted at your state and local level. They said there's a national ban on abortion. guess you better do it, San Francisco County, San Francisco City.
Yeah. Oh, that's exactly. I don't think those are contrary at all. Yes, I mean that is a fear people have, that we pass good legislation at a local and state level and it gets overturned
Are
by.
liberals right to be scared of this?
Yeah, we're all right to be scared of this, but yeah, I think, but yeah, if the Supreme Court in overturning Roe v. Wade simply put the matter back to the states. If the place where we would get a national abortion ban is out of Congress, if and that's kind of referring to what I said earlier. If the Republicans ran the board and got the power to pass a national abortion ban, I think that would trigger a de facto national split. I think you would see states nullify federal laws. I think you'd see states like California, Oregon, and Washington saying hell no, and that might even break up the nation.
That's quick. The Supreme Court says, hey, national abortion ban, everybody's banned from abortion, and within 24 hours we might see leftist states say, well, then I'm out.
I don't know if it's 24 hours, but I think they might say, screw that. We're going to maintain our rights here, and that would, yes, I think the Supreme Court is a loaded gun with the super conservative majority, and this attitude, that I think it's on both sides of the political spectrum, but there's a certain fundamentalism toward the right, and it's a religious fundamentalism toward the right side of the spectrum that doesn't, that really sees the opposition as the devil, it's Satan to be put out. And that's the dangerous part, that, of our growing extremes, that we are confronted with divisions where there is, people have fundamental moral views and will try to impose them just because they believe they're right, whether or not they have a majority, whether or not they're going to spur rebellion, but it's just because they think they're right, and without respect for what other people think.
We're looking at a Supreme Court that's the most conservative they've been in half a century. That's from the New York Times and other organizations saying we haven't seen a Supreme Court. You have to go back half a century into American history to find a Supreme Court that is this uniformly conservative. They have also overturned, I think, a couple different decisions, one with 60 years of precedent, one with 40 years of precedent. Yep. So they're doing these things. Now, I understand national abortion was kicked back, but they are conservative, and they've underdone some major linchpins of liberal understanding.
Oh, yes.
So it's not completely impossible that we could see a decision out of this court that's so extreme that it looks like something Americans hadn't seen in 2 to 3 generations, and they react poorly when that happens to them. I'd also point out you had Mike Pence say, let's have a national abortion ban. And he was not condemned by Republicans for violating the central tenets of federalism. I was a little bit surprised. That caught me off guard. I thought the Republicans would say, whoa, Mike, that violates federalism. We're all about federalism. We just got a major win for federalism. No. Soon as the Republicans got a major win for federalism, they went out and said, maybe federalism's not good enough. Let's ban abortions for everybody.
Yeah.
Opposite opinion of federalism. I go, you guys are a little bit skeptical, right? Let me ask you this question. This is why I was like, I wanted to put you on the left side of the debate, whatever the right term for that is. The Los Angeles Times had an article out called Americans Are Terrified of Other Americans and How to Stop the Polarization. Came out relatively recently. But how can I hope to persuade Republicans to change their minds if I'm convinced they're all extremists? Where I see fascists and neo-Nazis, I see no possibility for dialogue.
Yep.
Accurate as those labels may be, they also limit my ability to see the opponent's potential for change. Now, in response to this Los Angeles Times article right here, column Americans are terrified of other Americans, how to stop polarization. That article was about how to reach across the aisle, so to speak, and learn how to talk to other Americans who you don't share views with. In response, there were so many reader comments that the LA Times had to come out with another article.
Yeah.
America's polarized because the right doesn't accept reality. There is no common ground between arsonists and firefighters. A constructive conversation is not possible between those who value democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law, and those who don't. Guerrero's aspiration is noble, but her effort will fail as long as members of one tribe do not accept the principles on which the nation is governed. Mike Dale from Glendale, let's not even reach out to those right-wingers. They can't get it. He's not alone. Cynthia Carl from Los Angeles. Guerrero acknowledged the right-wing extremists are most likely to embrace violence. Most likely, according to the Anti-Defamation League in 2022, 100% of extremist-tied murders were committed by right-wing extremists. Don't ask me to see them as equals. So if liberals are already trash-talking the right, and when they say, hey, let's reach out to people on the right, the reaction is immediately, shut up, hell no, how dare you even suggest that? What chance do we have coming together as Americans, in your opinion?
Well, I mean, I think my read is limited. I think the divisions have gone to the level where we might break up over these issues. I mean, you'll find, you'll find those exact same kind of comments coming from the other side of things. I think we should be pretty careful about using words like fascism and neo-Nazi. That's certainly true of a faction. There's also people who are traditional conservatives who believe in limited government and don't like what's going on. I mean, they have a right to their views. I can see, from my standpoint, yeah, I think a lot of the right is unreasonable. Is not paying attention to certain realities. I mean, I'm a guy who works on climate, and I see like this wall of climate denial among, so much of the right, and ignorance of science, or deliberate ignorance of science. And so you can see where it's coming from. And at the same time, I do my best to dialogue with people I can talk to. I mean, just as an example, in terms of the climate issue, yeah, there's a certain percentage of people who don't, who I think probably I can't reach, and I don't spend a lot of time with them. There's a certain number of people who are kind of sitting there in the gray area who I can talk to, and I think we should at least, what you get is, again, we have media and political people on both sides who thrive on the division, who gain audience share on division. So when we get a Republican in the presidency, MSNBC's poll ratings shoot up. When we get a Democrat in the presidencies, Fox's ratings shoot up. They make money off of this. I mean, I'm not saying it's easy. I'm not saying that but I don't think it's a fool's errand. And I think at least we should be trying. But I get where people are coming from, and but with the level of division, thinking about, as I wrote my latest post this morning, I've been thinking about this, what David French is saying about how we need to exert civility and decency and try to deal with the other people, even if we very much disagree with their positions, from a respect as fellow human beings. And I wonder, I have honest doubts whether it's gone too far, whether it is possible, and whether we won't see a breakup as a result of that de facto, or would it be an official breakup? Will it be just a radical, or just kind of a de facto breakup where states just ignore the federal government, nullify federal laws? I don't know.
We have a question for you on that in a little bit, but let me ask you this, if I may. And on October 23rd, 2022, about a year ago, ABC News did a survey. Anger on their minds. NBC poll finds sky-high interest in polarization ahead of midterms. NBC News poll just showed how polarized the electorate is. 81% of Democrats say they believe the Republican Party agenda poses a threat that, if it isn't stopped, will destroy America as we know it. An almost identical share of Republicans, 79%, believe the same of the Democratic Party's agenda. It seems like voters are no longer looking for a contract with America. They want a divorce, said Harwood Democratic pollster. One more thing I wanted to show you. That was from 2022. We're going to show you another poll. 1 second, we're getting there. 2021. So I just showed you a poll from 2022. About 80% and 80% of voters on both sides feel the other side is an enemy who will destroy America. Now in 2021, they asked a similar survey.
I referred to that Bright Line study. That map you had there a couple of slides back is, there it is. You see those percentages where support for secession from the United States. You see that, out west we've got
47% for liberals, Democrats support secession.
And then down south, you look at that. What is that?
66% of Republicans in the South, where Marjorie Taylor Greene is located, support secession, meaning she was right.
And you look all over, even in the Northeast, my God, which is kind of the core of the country still, or 34% in the Midwest. I mean, those are large stats. The cumulative on the West Coast isn't that high, but you find these divisions.
Well, they're saying, only conservatives are interested in secession. This chart shuts that down. This chart says basically half of all Democrats in the West Coast are supporting secession. You cannot say it's just the Republican dream if this chart's
no. Well, Cal-Exit is substantially
exactly.
left-wing,
But that goes back to the original question I asked you. When all of these reporters came on, they said there is no national division, and they completely forgot about Cal-Exit. No mention of Cal-Exit. No mention of 30% of Californians went out during Trump. Completely forgotten. Not mentioned 30 different newspapers. I found that bizarre.
Yeah.
This is the other one I wanted. This is the other poll. So I showed you one from 2022. This is another one from 2021. University of Virginia, Sabato Crystal Ball Center, very well respected for political analysis. 80% of Biden voters, not elected officials, voters, and 84% of Trump voters feel elected officials from the other party are a clear and present danger to the USA. 74% of Biden voters, 78% of Trump voters feel all voters from the other party are a clear and present danger to the USA. When we're looking at a poll in 2022 that says 80% and 80% of both parties see the other side as an enemy, and then we're looking at a poll from 2021 that says 80% of all voters see everybody else on the other side as an enemy, they're not talking about elected officials. This isn't just elected officials. These are average Americans themselves, year after year, saying that they see 4/5 of the opposite side as equivalent to Al-Qaeda. A situation we can get past as Americans. Hey, we've seen stuff like in the 60s. We'll get past it. Or, oh my God, I've never seen anything that horrible in 40 years.
Oh, I think, this is in that French book, he calls this out as one of the precursors to civil war, where one side thinks the other side is a threat to their culture. It triggers the survival instinct. It kind of triggers those lower parts of the brain, where where we get violent, and that kind of threat of death, threat, fear, and this has been triggered, and the and it is as French says in his book, and I do agree with this part, that it is, the political class on each side profits off of this. They gain by raising the threat level, and makes good fundraising appeal.
True.
Yeah.
True.
And so we're, yes, when we are to this point where so many people regard the other side as a threat to their life and future existence, we're in a damn serious situation. And it has every potential to creep up on us. And one factor we haven't talked about, but it could very well be coming up, is we could be heading into some very tough economic times. There is a lot of, there's, the financial bubbles that this country has lived on are popping. The ability to print money, because the US dollar is the global reserve currency, is being steadily undermined. Saudi Arabia saying, they're ready to accept payment for oil in yuan. I mean, there's stuff going on in the global economic system and our own economic system, banks failing, that if you right now with, kind of going along, economically, I mean, there's a lot of people struggling, but if we go into deep recession or depression conditions, it's going to accelerate this. It's going to be, a match on gasoline.
Good point. Good point. And you're talking about the arrival of the joint precious minerals backed commodity joint currency of the BRIC nations. I believe now this year or last year was the first time that the collective BRICS nations produced more GDP than the West combined. You won't see that in the news at all. You hear about Donald Trump in jail, but you won't hear about how the US dollar is going to die and be returned to a level it hasn't seen since 1943. Certainly historic news, nowhere in the news. I want to cover this if we can.
Yeah.
A lot of people have said, well, it's the politicians making us polarized. It's the politicians, or it's social media. In 1974, 45% of Republicans identified as hardcore conservative. In 2016, it was 76%. In 1974, only 28% of Democrats identified as hardcore liberal. Now it's 59%. Both parties have doubled and have gone from under 50% to now 2/3. If you look at this chart, there's kind of a straight line from 76 to 92. And then roughly about the 1990s, you start to see an incline in polarization.
Yes.
Let me show you something else. So NPR started doing coverage of a book called The Big Sort in 2008.
That's a very important book.
Okay, you're familiar. And the Big Sort says people are sorting themselves into political ideology communities, ideologically similar communities. NPR did that in 2008. They also looked at it in 2017, said it's there. Then they looked at it in 2022, and they said it's there. And what they were pointing out was these landslide election counties, which also the New York Times has covered. So if you look at the map, 1992, red equals don't even run here if you're a Democrat. Blue equals don't even run here if you're a Republican. Gray equals competitive elections. You could run as a Democrat or Republican.
Yeah.
Most of America was open to competitive elections. You fast forward to 2016, almost all the gray is wiped out. Yeah. What they're saying is this is not because of the politicians. This is not because of social media, because you got to go back to the 90s. This is the American people themselves are sick and tired of other Americans and have been moving over 2 decades on their own, not because a politician told them, not because a social media app told them. And what that's done is polarized the country. It's not in fact, they outright reject gerrymandering as the cause of the polarization. And they say, no, it's Americans sorting themselves into communities going back 2 to 3 decades. And the only way to undo that is to get the Americans to leave and go back to their original communities. We're looking at a 3-decade-long pattern. Are these people wrong? Are they right? Because this seems to suggest the problem is the people themselves. It's not an app, it's not social media, and it's not the political leaders, which means the solution's only going to be the people themselves.
Well, how to sort this out? First, those party graphs that you gave. One thing that reflects also is the increasing number of independents. If you did a graph of the identity of the party identity, you would find while those ideological extremes are going up, the actual percentage of party membership in compared to independents is going down, and now independents are by far the largest party.
True.
So that's kind of a refinement there.
True.
The Big Sort. Bill, get the guys. The Big Sort is an important book. It really does chart how we have sorted out as people. So you got to say this does have a validity. There's a stat I quoted from the book I reviewed this morning is that in 1992, 38% of Americans lived in landslide counties, meaning counties where one party beats the other by more 20% or more. In 2016, that got to 60%. So yes, that's very interesting.
It's the same chart. It's just it's different coloring. It backs you up.
And that shows, yes, the rural especially rural areas have gone increasingly Republican. Urban areas, metropolitan areas have gone increasingly Democrat. So, the maps, if you do the by population, if you even them out by population, it doesn't look necessarily like that sea of red. But yeah, you've got to give credence to that. We have as people sorted out. And yeah, I don't know if it's generational. I don't know. Actually, a lot of the sorting, the author of that book said traced to even around 1965. It was a slower process, but
sure.
There's a break point around 1965 where before that, Americans believed in the system. And after that, people stopped believing. I mean, what did we have then? The Kennedy assassination, Vietnam War, the riots. So, but it's slowly happening. Yes, 1990s seemed to be a time when it really did take off. And that's also a time when you had the rise of right-wing media, Rush Limbaugh, Fox. It's the time when you had Newt Gingrich starting to play the real hardball, divisive politics. So, yeah, I think we have to give credence to the Big Sort.
That's a lot of them are saying what you said. Around 1990, something seems to have happened, which I like to point out because gerrymandering wasn't an issue until 2000. This trend starts 10 years before. Social media wasn't a problem until 2010. This starts 2 decades before. So when I see people that go, oh, it's this, it's that, and I go, then how come it started decades before? Yeah. It's us. We are the enemy. We have seen the enemy, and it is us, right? There was some Roman phrase or something like that.
Or pogo.
Let me ask you another question. You seem to be recognizing that a split may be necessary. Not a fan. You've said you're not a fan of it. Totally not a fan. Don't want this to happen. But hey, if we can't get along and we're at each other's throats, then maybe there's something there. I see a lot of liberals saying, hell no, let's never split up the country. But so what? There's a new show called Wonkette, and there's another new show called Breaking Points, and I saw them do the exact same coverage, and it went like this. Oh, liberals are generally against this. Democrats are against this. This is stupid. Us liberals, Democrats need to be against this. This is a right-wing talking point. But I have to say, a couple of my friends told me, why the hell not? And they're liberal too. So liberals aren't for this. Liberals aren't for this. By the way, I have to say, liberals I know are totally for this. It seems a little schizophrenic. I saw 2 different networks say the same message. Are liberals for this? Are liberals not for this? Why are they saying we're not for this? But actually, I know hella people who are for it. Why the confusing messaging?
Because people are confused. Yeah, people are confused.
Are liberals for this? Are liberals against this?
Well, as you saw from that polling, that map of the United States, there is a substantial support for secession and devolution of the United States among Democrats. Which is you just passed it there, but yeah, that and that's a proxy for liberals. So you have some really and again, yes, you're going to find it's interesting. You look at different look at the East Coast and the West, the Northeast and the West Coast, which are kind of the heartlands of liberalism and the left in the U.S. There's where you get the highest number of Democrats with the support for secession. So yeah, you can't say it's just purely from the right. You will get a certain number of people who say, from the left and progressive and liberal side, saying that yes, secession is a rightist plot to break us up so the corporations can balkanize us and exploit us even more. You'll get, you will get that. I mean, I've gotten comments like that on my blog, and I'm, and I have to say, you look and you see there's support. Again, I think we should really be starting to talk to each other. And also one thing I do, I recommend, in a lot of ways, the Democratic Party, the left, have abandoned organizing in rural areas. They've ceded the rural areas to the Republicans.
Right.
I think that's a big mistake, because there's a lot of people out there who are, if anything, they're more downtrodden than people in the cities, and they feel abandoned by the Democratic Party, and they're, in a lot of cases, they're not really wrong. So it's going to take, it's going to take reaching out, and I ultimately get to the need for a lot deeper grassroots organizing that's rooted in communities and localities, that actually works on, addresses real people's issues, economic issues, that where they stuff where they that's affecting their daily lives, and we don't see enough.
Just to back up what you're saying, I remember I think it was the governor of Michigan or the governor of Ohio in the 2016 election was saying, I'm coming through and I'm not seeing any Hillary signs anywhere, and you guys need to get on this. And she called the Hillary Clinton campaign, and they completely ignored her. And then Hillary lost that entire region.
That's right.
So that's what that was a Democrat saying that. And she got trash talked. She's not a Republican. She's a Democrat saying, we put zero effort in on reaching out to her. They basically just ceded territory to Trump. And then they got shocked when they lost the election. Michigan governor, Democrat, said that. So she was not well liked, because the message from Hillary was, we didn't do anything wrong. And here's this Democrat going, actually, you kind of screwed this up intentionally. And I told you how to avoid it, and you ignored me. So this is all your fault. You're not going to see a lot of that in the media. It didn't go very well. last question I want to ask you before you have any comments.
Mhm.
One of the things I've seen is people saying, well, Marjorie Taylor Greene came on and said we need a national divorce. And maybe she meant secession. And maybe she just meant splitting states up from each other. Not clear. She wasn't clear. She was somewhat inartful with her message. A lot of people said important dialogue that she started. And yes, she was telling the truth, but a lot of confusion. What are you getting at?
Mhm.
So one of the questions they asked was, if you're not doing secession, but you're doing split the states, I saw a lot of people say, how could you even do that? How could we even imagine splitting states? And I thought that was bizarre because we have split states
Yeah,
from other states 4 times.
yeah,
Kentucky from Virginia, Maine from Massachusetts, West Virginia from Virginia, Vermont from New York, and you could say Kentucky from North Carolina.
mhm,
Legal, peaceful,
yeah,
happened. So they're saying, well, these states are purple. You could never separate them. Not
mhm,
true. A lot of people said Georgia's purple. Not true. Atlanta is hardcore blue. 90% of the rest of Georgia's red.
yeah,
The urban triangle in Texas between Houston, Dallas, and then San Antonio and Austin, about 1/5 of the landmass of Texas is blue. The entire rest is basically red. We can also go to Illinois. Illinois is not purple. Chicago is, and then 95% of the rest of the land is red. You can also look at Oregon, about 3/4 is red.
yes,
Why could we not split these states? Like you could split Georgia and have 1/5 of it become the new state of Atlanta. You could split the urban triangle from Texas. You could split Chicago from the rest of Illinois. You could split the blue urban part from Oregon. Now, these aren't, scientific drawings, etc., but it's just a rough concept.
mm,
Given that we split states off from each other before, and that these states aren't actually purple, could we have some peace? Here's the blue part of Texas. It's 90% blue. Well, now it's a new state. So you red people don't have to worry because they're never really going to affect your elections. Same thing in Georgia. 90% red. Okay, you're separated from Atlanta. Atlanta's always going to be blue 50 years in the future. But if we pull Atlanta out of Georgia, wouldn't the rest of Georgia stay conservative for the next 20 to 30 years? And if people had the ability to know that their political climate was not going to be radically changed because of the next election, could that equal calming and reduce tension?
that's really an interesting concept. To be clear, if you look at Taylor Greene's Twitter strings, and I had this I wrote an article about this. Um, if you look at, she really is calling for radical devolution. She isn't calling for breaking up the federal system. She would maintain a unity of the United States for national defense and such, but would radically devolve power to the states. So that is clearly what she was recommending when she talked about a national divorce. Kind of, not necessarily, kind of moving into separate bedrooms, more than moving into separate houses. It's a you know you it's there's a whole lot of Twitter string below that. But right now, in terms of splitting up states, I don't know if you're aware. I mean, there is a huge movement in Eastern Oregon to separate and join Idaho,
Right.
because it's and that has gained support of most of the counties in Eastern Oregon. And that's my state, Washington State, starkly politically different on as is Oregon on the two sides of the Cascades. Very red, very Republican. East of the Cascades, very, very blue Democrat on the west side of the Cascades. And
Didn't
I
they have some
thought,
violent protests up there? There were some truckers or there was some freeway shut down and some people got real upset, if I'm not mistaken.
yeah, I'm not quite sure what you're referring to, but I mean,
Everything.
I know people in Eastern Washington who feel just ignored and just trodden down by the West Side. So I think it's an interesting idea to think about devolving states in ways that let let them go different ways. I mean, um, and it might be it might represent a practical alternative with our divisions, kind of being sick of each other, it seems like. But I'm, I really think we should, we should really think about more, you know, more practical arrangements between us that are maybe more confederal rather than. I mean, I do think that right now we've reached a place where our nation of 330 million is becoming increasingly ungovernable from the center.
Mm-hmm.
And corporations, the big rich, have essentially gained regulatory capture over most of the federal government. So I do think we need, in a practical sense, to build movements that create more democratic alternatives closer to where we live. But I do see that there are pretty it might be a thought to think about city states for places like New York City and Chicago, and at the same time get rid of the electoral college. That's a yeah.
That's the last question. So people have said, we can fix this with federalism, or we don't need a national divorce. We need marriage counseling. Can we return America to a level of federalism that would reduce the tension?
I think we have to go through some pretty tough times. I think the level of interest, level of capture by interests in this country that prevent the kind of reforms that would diminish divisions kind of precludes us from having easy solutions at the federal level. I don't know. I don't know if we can do much better at the state and local level, but I think we need to try. Yeah.
Some people have said, hey, I understand it's tense, but we don't need a national divorce. We need marriage counseling. You'll see a famous Utah governor said this. This was covered widely in the news. What is marriage counseling that works at healing the division of 200 to 300 million people look like?
I don't know. Respectful dialogue, if it's possible. Not learning how to. I think part of our problem is that indeed we are sorted out. And the more you hang around with your same kind of people, the more you go in that direction. I mean, where I live is a very heavily Democratic Party place. It's talk about a landslide county. Seattle and King County are total landslide blue. So and again in my career, like I said, we had conferences which we call them Harvesting Clean Energy, which engaged people from across the spectrum, farmers, on practical stuff they could do to generate clean energy on their farms. And I think, just blue skying it, looking for stuff that, brings us together. What common interests do we have? Can we sit down at a table and say, well, we think this is important. Well, a better rail network, that would benefit both, farmers and cities. Benefits small towns and big cities, stuff like that. I think finding common ground on practical investments we can make as a people to bring us together. Again, that's very difficult when the rich are evading taxes and when so much of our money is going to the military-industrial complex. But it's a difficult issue. But I think looking at very practical stuff that actually improves people's lives, and that would be that's really all I can think. And then, I mean, the culture war issues do divide us, and they're difficult to bridge. I've got my, I'm pretty predictably lefty on the culture war issues. Um, I don't know if we can have discussions on them that I mean, it seems almost impossible in some cases, but maybe if we start to talk to each other, we'll find that 80% of, those 80, no, not everyone on the other side is going to kill me. If and that, if we can possibly start that, and at the same time recognize the interest of politicians and media in promoting that image of, those other people are going to kill you. So,
yeah. What an incredible statement where we're at. What's the way to heal ourselves? Well, we got to start convincing ourselves that the other side won't murder us. Yeah. That's how bad it is. Think about that. Yeah, I agree with you. It's not like I got to convince myself that they might have a reasonable point every once in a while. I got to convince myself that they have some good facts, even though they misinterpreted. We're past that. I got to convince myself this guy is going to murder me because I think differently. Wow. Yeah. Wow. That reminds me of the Hutus and the Tutsis. Yeah. That sort of language. Okay. Last minute thoughts. And this is something I always ask all the guests. Picture somebody's watching this. We've been sitting here for a while. We've covered a lot of stuff in depth. Thank you so much. Somebody's watching this and they go, okay, good points. And they go, I don't remember everything they said, but there was this one statement that the guest made, and I just can't get it out of my head. 5 days from now, they've forgotten most of this interview. They watched it, but 5 days from now, they're going to have a thought, and it's going to be what I call a sticky thought. What is that sticky thought that you want everybody to remember 5 days from now? They just can't get out of their head.
I think my stickiest thought is, we need to start to rebuild democracy from the ground up. And we need to start to rebuild democracy in the places we live, in our cities and towns, in our states, in our regions. And to do that, we need to create organizations that are independent of the existing political parties, and that as much as possible embrace a variety of issues, embrace a multitude of issues, and develop agendas to move us forward as people. And that these movements and activities need to reach out across geographies, from the center of cities to the remote rural areas. We need to kind of think geographically and think about how we can weave together our places, our states, and our region around practical stuff to improve people's lives. About better rail networks, clean energy, improved education systems. Because really, if we don't, there's a giant growing across the water from both of us, which is rapidly moving to exceed us. Now, I don't buy into Chinophobia. I think that's a big mistake. But we need to recognize that if we don't pull our stuff together, we're not going to be number one, and might not even be number two. We don't need to be number one, but we've got growing powers in the world that if we don't pull our stuff together, we're already getting exceeded, and we will be exceeded in many more ways. And we need to start where we live.
Back up what you said. Everybody should check out China brokered peace between Iran and Saudi Arabia. That was something the West couldn't do in 100 years.
A monumental political change.
Yeah, you won't see that largely covered in the news. If they're also able to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine, they are the new peace brokers. I would invite everybody to look up the 1951 Suez Canal crisis. America was not always the world power, even after World War II. It wasn't until they brought peace to a region instead of England and usurped England and France in the Suez Canal crisis in 1951 that the world recognized that America was now the global leader in peace. Did we see a similar thing with Iran and Saudi Arabia and China recently? You will see absolutely no coverage of this in the media mostly. So completely back up what you're saying. Monumental things happening and zero discussion in American mainstream media. Obviously, the way to handle problems and stay on top of it as a 300 million population is to not discuss things. That's how you figure problems out and come up with plans. I'm joking. I'm sorry. We'll leave it there. Any last minute comments?
No, I think we've covered a lot of ground. I appreciate the conversation. Thank you for bringing me on.
I will email you later a copy of the video. I understand maybe not, but if you know anybody who's willing to have an honest conversation, we're just trying to have as many people as we can. So I hope we showed we're trying to be fair and honest here.
I will be happy to refer you.
Thank you. I will email you shortly. Thank you, Patrick. And we will all see you soon with our next interview. Thank you all. I will email